The first time I realized how fragile life could be was not when my marriage ended, nor when I stood trembling in a courtroom signing divorce papers. It was in the small, quiet moments afterward, when silence echoed louder than any argument. A kitchen filled with unpaid bills instead of laughter, the empty space on the other side of the bed, the tiny shoes by the door reminding me of the little soul depending on me to be stronger than my exhaustion. Those moments became the rhythm of my days, pulling me forward even when my heart felt like it had no strength left to beat. The air of the restaurant was heavy that night, laced with the scent of expensive perfume and the faint bitterness of cigarette smoke clinging to patrons' jackets. My heels clicked against the marble floor, each step a reminder of how far I had fallen from the life I once knew. 6 hours into my shift, and my body already ached, but my mind could not rest, not with Emma waiting at home, not with rent due, not with the endless weight of being both mother and father pressed into my shoulders. I told myself I was invisible, that if I kept my head down, no one would notice the shadows beneath my eyes or the trembling in my hands when I set down wine glasses. But invisibility is a fragile illusion. One sharp look from a customer could cut through it. One harsh word from my manager could unravel it. And one memory, his memory, could shatter it entirely. David's ghost followed me everywhere. Even when he wasn't there, I could still hear his mocking laugh in my head, feel the bruising grip of his hands from years ago, see the smirk he wore whenever he wanted me to remember who had the power. And yet, for Emma, I pushed forward. For Emma, I kept breathing, kept walking, kept serving overpriced meals to people who would never understand what it meant to scrape pennies together for daycare. The restaurant buzzed with life, couples entwined in whispered conversations, businessmen shaking hands over glasses of bourbon, families celebrating anniversaries with indulgent desserts. Their joy existed in a world parallel to mine, separated by a thin veil I could never quite cross again. I smiled when expected, apologized when demanded, and moved as if I were part of the decor, useful but unseen. Until the night everything shifted. It began with a simple inhale, a gust of cool autumn air sweeping through the restaurant doors, prickling across my skin and lifting the hair on my arms. I turned, tray balanced on my palm, and froze. The figure in the doorway was both familiar and foreign. A tailored suit, hugging shoulders I once clung to, a sharp jawline I once traced with my fingertips, eyes that once promised me forever but delivered only betrayal. David. My throat closed. The plate trembled in my grasp, nearly sliding from my hands. It had been over a year since I had seen him, yet the effect was instantaneous, a tide of fear rushing in to drown me. My pulse hammered, breath shallow, every muscle screaming to run, even as my legs refused to move. He hadn't seen me yet. He was charming the hostess, one hand tucked in his pocket, the other gesturing with that easy confidence I had once mistaken for love. He looked powerful, successful, untouched by the wreckage he had left behind. And me? I stood in a uniform that pinched at the seams, with aching feet and a hollow heart. If his eyes landed on me now, if that smirk curved across his lips as recognition dawned, I knew the humiliation would be unbearable. He would see that I had fallen, that while he thrived, I was serving tables in a place he could afford to dine in without thought. My vision blurred with panic. The kitchen lay across the room, past him. There was no escape. The hostess reached for the reservation book, and I knew within moments she would lead him to a table, too close, too exposed. My world spun in desperation, searching for an anchor, for anything to shield me from his gaze. And then I saw him. A man at the bar, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark suit that whispered wealth and authority. His hand rested on the counter, adorned with a heavy ring that caught the golden light. Before I could think, before fear could paralyze me further, I acted on instinct. I walked straight to him, slipped into the space beside him, and grabbed his hand. It was warm, steady, grounding, the kind of hand you could cling to in a storm, even if it belonged to a stranger. My voice came out in a frantic whisper. "My ex-husband just walked in. Please, just for a minute, pretend you know me." Time slowed as I turned to meet his eyes. They were dark, so deep they seemed bottomless, studying me with the sharp focus of a man accustomed to danger. His face was carved in sharp lines, high cheekbones, a strong jaw shadowed by stubble, lips pressed in a firm line. Everything about him radiated stillness, control, the kind of presence that could silence a room without a word. And then he spoke, his voice low, accented, laced with something both commanding and strangely soothing. "Alessandra," he murmured, as though he had been waiting for me all along. A shiver raced through me. For the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. I was seen, so completely that it terrified me. From that moment, the trajectory of my life tilted. I didn't yet know his name, didn't yet understand the shadows that surrounded him, but I felt the world shift beneath my feet. I had reached out in desperation, clinging to a stranger's hand, unaware that I was stepping into a story far greater, far more dangerous, and far more healing than I could ever have imagined. Because that hand I held didn't belong to just any man. It belonged to Vincent Russo, a name spoken in whispers, a man with power written into every movement, a man whose world was nothing like mine. And yet, as his hand pressed firmly against mine, steadying my panic, I felt a warmth bloom in my chest. A spark I had thought long extinguished, something that felt suspiciously like hope. If you've followed me this far into Lily's story, into the tremor of fear and the flicker of something new, let your heart guide you. Share your thoughts, leave a comment. Let your energy ripple outward. Your presence here means more than you know, and every small act of support is like a healing light. If this beginning stirred you, I invite you gently to subscribe, to stay, to walk beside us as the story unfolds, because the journey has only just begun. And as the night pressed forward, with David still prowling somewhere in the restaurant, and Vincent's hand still wrapped around mine, I had no idea the choice I had just made would change everything that came after. The moment his fingers closed around mine, the air shifted, charged with a tension that stole my breath. The stranger did not smile, nor did he pull away. His eyes, dark and unreadable, searched my face with the patience of a man who knew the world bent to his will. I had expected confusion, maybe annoyance. What I found was silence. Deep, steady, unsettling silence, before he finally spoke my name as though he had chosen it for me. Alessandra. It wasn't my name, yet it wrapped around me like a cloak, shielding me from David's gaze. My pulse thundered as if my body recognized the safety I dared not trust. I glanced over my shoulder. David was scanning the room, lips curled in that familiar smirk I despised. Panic surged again, but the man beside me shifted, angling his body to block me from sight, his hand never loosening from mine. His palm pressed firmly against the small of my back, protective, possessive. And in that moment, I realized I had tethered myself to someone who commanded the very space around him. His companions watched with quiet amusement, their laughter hushed, as though even their mirth required his permission. The scarred one, Enzo, leaned forward, eyes narrowing as though measuring me. I shrank under the weight of that gaze, but Vincent, though I did not yet know his name, spoke with a calm finality that left no room for questions. Not now. And like a tide obeying the moon, they receded into silence. The weight of his hand, the calm in his voice, the fierce stillness of his gaze. Something in me cracked, letting in warmth where only fear had lived. I had not expected kindness here, not from him, not from anyone. Yet when he whispered, "Look at me," not at him, I obeyed. His words were not a command, but a lifeline. My trembling eased, and for the first time in years I felt seen without being diminished. David moved across the restaurant, his path curving dangerously close. I froze, but the man beside me raised one hand, a subtle gesture I barely noticed. Enzo rose smoothly, intercepting David with a manufactured stumble, steering him elsewhere. I stared at the stranger, stunned. Power radiated from him, not in noise, but in the effortless way the world shifted at his slightest motion. "Your name?" he asked softly, his accent turning the question into something richer, almost reverent. "Lily," I whispered. My voice shook, but it was mine. He nodded once, as though sealing a pact. Lily. He tasted the sound, as if deciding it suited me. Then, with a faint smile that never reached his eyes, he added, "You're afraid?" Not only of him. The truth of his words cut deeper than I wanted to admit. I thought of unpaid rent, custody battles, bruises hidden beneath makeup, and nights spent staring at the ceiling in a silence too loud to bear. How could he see all of that in a single glance? Yet he did. And though it terrified me, it also unraveled something inside me, as if he had lifted a burden I no longer had to pretend didn't exist. "Midnight," he said after a pause. "I'll wait." "You don't have to—" "I will," he interrupted, his voice steady as stone. "You should not be alone." No man had spoken to me like that in years, not with presumption, but with conviction. And though I should have recoiled, I found myself leaning closer, seeking more of that steady warmth. The rest of the night blurred, my work reduced to muscle memory, yet every time I glanced toward the bar, his gaze found mine. It anchored me, steadied me, made the hours pass until midnight arrived, and my body trembled with fatigue, and something else I didn't dare name. By the time I stepped into the cold night air, Enzo was waiting, a black SUV purring at the curb. He opened the door with a slight bow. "Miss Cooper." My name, spoken with formality that startled me. "Mr. Russo sent me." Russo. A name that seemed to ripple through the air, carrying weight, meaning, whispers I didn't yet understand. My pulse quickened, not from fear alone, but from the certainty that I had stepped into something far larger than myself. The city blurred past the window as we drove, my thoughts tangled between fear and gratitude, exhaustion, and hope. When we finally stopped in front of my building, Enzo handed me an envelope, heavy with cash, heavier with questions. I hesitated, shame burning my cheeks, but his tone was calm, almost kind. A gesture of goodwill. I clutched the envelope, torn between pride and desperation, between refusing and needing. Inside me, the battle raged, but over it all was the memory of Vincent Russo's eyes, the way they had steadied me when I was unraveling, the way he had shielded me without asking for anything in return. That night, as I tucked Emma into bed and watched her sleep, I felt the weight of a choice pressing down. I had reached for a stranger's hand in desperation, not knowing it belonged to a man who lived in shadows. Now that same hand seemed to reach back, offering not just protection, but the terrifying possibility of something more. And though I told myself to resist, to guard my heart, I knew already, the moment I touched him, my life had changed. If you felt the tremor of this beginning, if the fragile threads of hope woven through fear touched you, let your heart leave a trace here. A like, a comment, even a quiet subscription. It isn't just support, it's a ripple of shared light. Healing begins when stories are held together, when voices echo in unison across the dark. For this was only the second step in a path neither of us expected. And as dawn crept over the city, I realized I was no longer walking alone. The stranger with the dark eyes had already become a chapter in my story. And the next page was waiting to be turned. The first time I looked into his eyes long enough to forget the noise of the world, I understood danger could wear the face of comfort. Vincent's gaze held me captive in a way that had nothing to do with power and everything to do with presence. Those dark irises were not merely watching me, they were reading me, peeling back the layers I had carefully constructed to keep the world at bay. His hand was still on mine, steady and unyielding, as if he had no intention of letting me slip away. The restaurant's hum continued around us, glasses clinking, laughter rising, footsteps echoing across the polished floor, but within the space between us, silence reigned. It was the kind of silence that pressed into your chest, forcing your heart to beat louder than you wanted it to, reminding you that you were alive. I should have pulled back. Every instinct told me to retreat before I drowned in those eyes, before I gave away secrets I wasn't ready to share. But something stronger than fear whispered, "Stay." It wasn't logic. It wasn't safety. It was the small, aching part of me that had grown weary of surviving without ever living. "You're trembling," Vincent observed, his voice pitched low enough that only I could hear. There was no judgment in it, only a kind of solemn acknowledgement. "Are you afraid of him, or of me?" The question lodged deep inside me, raw and sharp. I didn't answer, because the truth was complicated. David terrified me, yes, but this man before me. He unnerved me in a different way. He saw me too clearly, and being seen was sometimes more frightening than being ignored. I finally whispered, "I just can't let him see me like this." Vincent's expression shifted, his eyes narrowing slightly as if he had already drawn his conclusions about the man across the room. His hand slid from mine only to settle at the small of my back again, a subtle movement that made my pulse stutter. Protective, possessive, anchoring. "Then he won't," Vincent said simply. "Not a promise. an inevitability. I should have asked why he cared, why a stranger would step so willingly into my chaos. But the way his voice wrapped around me, steady and calm, made me lean closer instead of pulling away. For a fleeting heartbeat, I let myself imagine what it would feel like to always have someone who said things like that, words that carried weight, words that built safety around me like invisible walls. From the corner of my eye, I saw David shift at his table, his gaze sweeping across the restaurant. My breath caught. He was searching. He was hunting. But before panic could overwhelm me, Vincent's body shifted slightly, broad shoulders creating a barrier that blocked me from view. It was instinctive, uncalculated, and yet precise. He knew exactly what to do. "Look only at me," Vincent instructed softly. His tone wasn't commanding. It was healing, soothing, like a hand pressed gently to a wound to stop the bleeding. So I did. I let the world blur at the edges and focused on the warmth of his presence, the steadiness of his breathing, the way his voice hummed with quiet authority. And for the first time in so long, I felt safe. Not because the danger was gone, but because I wasn't facing it alone. I didn't realize how long I had been staring until one of his companions, a tall man with a scar cutting across his jawline, cleared his throat in amusement. Vincent didn't look away from me, but his voice dropped, firm and final. "Not now, Enzo." And just like that, the man with the scar, Enzo, fell silent. The others shifted their attention elsewhere. Whatever hold Vincent had over them, it was absolute. It dawned on me slowly. I had not grabbed the hand of just any man at the bar. I had stumbled into the orbit of someone who carried a gravity all his own. Someone whose very presence bent the air around him. Someone whose world was carved from shadows and whispers. But instead of fear, an unfamiliar warmth stirred in my chest. Gratitude, yes. But more than that, a dangerous curiosity. I didn't yet know his name, but I knew enough to sense that my life, once narrow and fragile, had just collided with something vast and unstoppable. And that realization terrified me almost as much as it comforted me. The night pressed on, but the moment stayed imprinted, etched into my pulse. Later, when I lay awake in my small apartment with Emma's soft breathing beside me, I would replay it again and again, the way his hand steadied mine, the way his body shielded me without question, the way his voice lowered when he asked me to look only at him. In those fragile hours, I would admit to myself what I couldn't say aloud, that something inside me shifted when I met his eyes, that a part of me long starved of tenderness had leaned toward the flame of him, despite knowing it might burn. And yet, perhaps that is what healing sometimes looks like. Not the absence of pain, but the willingness to reach toward warmth again, even after the cold has nearly broken you. If you've been touched by this quiet unraveling, by this fragile thread of safety spun between strangers, I invite you to breathe with me here. Leave your words behind like gentle footprints. Let me know you walked through this chapter with me. A like, a comment, even the choice to stay and subscribe. It is more than support, it is shared light. And sometimes shared light is the very thing that helps a heart believe in hope again. Because this was only the beginning. The truth of who Vincent Russo was, the depths of the shadows he carried, the risks of stepping closer, all of that still waited just beyond the horizon. And as dawn crept closer, I could already sense that fate had no intention of letting me walk away unchanged. The envelope felt heavier than it should have, as though paper and ink could carry the weight of questions I wasn't ready to ask. Marco had handed it to me at the end of my shift, his hands clumsy with nervousness, his eyes darting toward the back of the restaurant where Vincent's shadow lingered, even after he had left. I hadn't opened it then. Pride, fear, suspicion, all tangled inside me. But now, in the quiet of the black SUV that hummed through the city streets, I finally dared to slide the flap open. Cash, more than I made in weeks of long shifts, and a note written in careful, slanted script. For your trouble tonight. The car will take you home safely. VR. Heat rose in my cheeks. Trouble? Did he think I was some problem to be solved with money? Or worse, did he think I had staged my panic as a performance for his generosity? My pulse tightened with humiliation. But beneath the burn of pride, another truth flickered. The money could change everything. Rent, daycare, groceries. Winter boots for Emma, so her small feet wouldn't ache from the cold. Survival. I clenched the envelope shut, as if by pressing the paper closed, I could lock away the temptation gnawing at me. Across the front seat, Enzo's pale eyes flicked to the mirror, catching mine. He said nothing, his silence strangely protective, but I wondered if he could hear the war inside me. When we pulled up in front of my apartment, I almost bolted out of the car just to escape the suffocating pull of choices I didn't want to make. The night air stung with frost as I stepped onto the sidewalk, clutching the envelope as though it might bite me. Enzo followed, opening the door with the kind of courtesy that felt oddly old world, as if I were someone of importance and not just a waitress scraping through life. "Mr. Russo would appreciate if you kept it," he said simply, nodding toward the envelope. "Consider it a gesture of goodwill." Goodwill. The word should have soothed me, but instead it twisted like a thread tightening around my ribs. What did goodwill mean in a world like his? I thanked him with the kind of politeness born of exhaustion and climbed the stairs to my apartment. Mrs. Patel met me at the door, smiling gently, Emma sleeping soundly on her couch. Relief softened the sharp edges of my night as I gathered my daughter into my arms, breathing in the familiar sweetness of her hair, the warmth of her small body against mine. For that moment, the envelope didn't matter. Nothing mattered but Emma. But when I laid her in bed and the apartment fell silent again, my gaze returned to the cream-colored envelope on the counter. It was still there in the morning, untouched but undeniable, a quiet promise of both danger and deliverance. Days passed, but the gravity of Vincent Russo didn't fade. His presence had marked the air around me, and no amount of routine could erase it. At work, whispers followed me. Marco's sudden deference, co-workers glancing my way with curiosity they didn't dare voice. At home, my phone lit up with an unknown number, texts brief but startlingly personal. "Did you sleep well, Lily?" Another. "Your ex won't be a problem anymore. Consider it handled." Fear laced with relief coursed through me each time his name, initials always, appeared on the screen. I should have ignored him. I should have cut the tie before it wove itself deeper. But when you've lived too long in shadows, even a dangerous light feels like salvation. The night he invited me to his home, I almost said no. Almost. But then Emma tugged on my sleeve, her wide eyes full of innocence, asking, "Are we going on an adventure tonight, Mummy?" And suddenly the word no dissolved on my tongue. The SUV arrived exactly at 8, sleek and black against the fading dusk. Emma skipped beside me, clutching her stuffed rabbit, while I held her small backpack packed with crayons and spare clothes. Enzo greeted us at the door, his sharp presence softened when Emma asked if he was a dragon. He knelt, voice low and gentle, promising her ice cream instead. For reasons I didn't understand, my daughter trusted him instantly. Perhaps children can see what adults cannot, that even those forged in steel can carry quiet gentleness when it matters. The drive wound us through parts of the city I had never seen, past mansions veiled by high gates and walls of ivy. When we finally arrived, the sight stole my breath. A house of glass and stone glowed against the night, gardens spilling light like constellations onto the ground. It was elegance without arrogance, wealth without gaudiness, and it terrified me more than it impressed me, because no one built fortresses like this without needing to keep the world out. At the door, a woman greeted us. "Maria," he had said. Petite, warm, her smile genuine as she crouched to Emma's height and promised her gardens with glowing flowers and a teddy bear waiting for a friend. Against every instinct to cling to my daughter, I watched as Emma's hand slipped trustingly into hers. I told myself I could still see her through the glass room nearby, that she was safe. But when Maria led her away, a part of me tore open with both fear and longing. Enzo cleared his throat, leading me toward heavy wooden doors carved with vines. His words were soft, but carried weight. "What you see and hear tonight should remain between you and him." Then the door opened, and I stepped into a library that could have belonged to another century. Towering shelves, spiral staircases, a fire burning steady in the hearth. And there he stood, as though carved from shadow and flame. Vincent Russo turned, his dark eyes locking onto mine, and for the second time in my life, the world shifted. "Lily," he said, my name rolling from his tongue like something sacred. I wanted to resist, to demand answers, to ask why me. But when he gestured toward the chair by the fire, his presence folding around me like warmth against cold, my body moved before my doubts could stop it. He asked me nothing I expected. He poured wine I refused, nodded in quiet approval when I chose clarity for Emma's sake, and leaned closer as though my words held more weight than anyone else's in his world. And when he finally spoke of David, how Enzo had warned him, how fear had drained his face, I realized with startling clarity my tormentor was gone, silenced not by the law that had failed me, but by the gravity of this man before me. Something inside me cracked then, not from fear, but from relief so deep it hurt. We dined together, my eyes darting often toward the glass wall where Emma's laughter glimmered like music. And all the while Vincent's voice wove through me, steady, attentive, as if he cared not just about what I said, but about the spaces between my words. By the time dessert melted sweetly on my tongue, I had almost forgotten to be afraid. Almost. And when his hand brushed mine across the table, when his gaze softened, not with hunger, but with something infinitely more dangerous, gentleness, I understood. I was already entangled. If you feel the pull of this story, If something in you stirs at the thought of protection entwined with tenderness, let your heart leave a mark here. A quiet comment, a like, even the choice to stay and follow the rest. Each is a small ripple of connection, a healing touch across the distance. Sometimes stories remind us of the love we all deserve, and your presence here helps that reminder shine brighter, because that night was not an ending, but the opening of a door I could never again pretend was closed. And as Vincent's voice deepened with promises I hadn't asked for, as Emma's laughter drifted faintly through the glass, I knew that whatever came next would shape the rest of my life. The sapphire caught the firelight like a fragment of night sky, glimmering against my skin as though it had been waiting for me all along. Vincent slid the promise ring onto my hand with a steadiness that felt like more than a gesture. It felt like a vow stitched into bone and blood. His eyes, shadowed yet luminous, did not waver as he leaned closer, his lips brushing against my knuckles with reverence I had never known a man capable of giving. For a heartbeat, I forgot to breathe. For years, I had lived as though love were a battle, tenderness something you had to earn through pain. But here was this man, whose world was carved from danger, offering me not fear, not control, but devotion disguised as a quiet promise. The kiss he pressed to my lips afterward was unhurried, as though he had been waiting for this exact moment to let his walls crack. His hand cradled my face, thumb brushing against the place where bruises once lived, and my heart shuddered under the realization that someone could hold me without trying to break me. When we parted, the night outside had thickened into velvet darkness, the sea beyond the windows restless and wild. Vincent's forehead rested against mine, his breath warm as he whispered, 2 months, and then a lifetime, if you'll have me. I should have been afraid. Instead, I felt steadier than I had in years. The drive back toward the city blurred in a haze of headlights and whispered plans. Vincent's hand never left mine, his thumb tracing the sapphire again and again, as though reminding me of the promise we now shared. He spoke of security measures, of men watching over Emma's school and my apartment, of phones and safe houses, each detail laced with a protectiveness that was as overwhelming as it was comforting. But even as he spoke of shadows, I found myself thinking not of danger, but of the warmth of his hand, the softness in his voice when he said my name, the future he painted in brushstrokes of sunlit vineyards and quiet mornings. When we reached my building, he insisted on walking me up the narrow stairwell, Emma still fast asleep in his arms. She stirred once, murmuring his name in her half-dream, and his lips curved in something that looked suspiciously like wonder. Inside the apartment, I tucked Emma into bed, brushing curls from her forehead while Vincent stood in the doorway, silent, watchful, as though this simple act of motherhood was sacred to him. When I finally turned, his eyes softened, and I knew then, whatever else his world demanded of him, this was the part he wanted to keep untouched. But peace is fragile, it always has been. The knock came later, sharp and unexpected, rattling the thin door of my apartment. Foolishly, I thought it was Vincent returning after forgetting something. I opened it without checking, without hesitation, and there he was, David. His face was flushed, eyes glassy with drink and rage. He shoved past me, the stench of whiskey following him like a second skin. His words slurred but sharp, spitting accusations about my new life, his gaze snapping to the sapphire on my finger with venom. "You think you're safe with him?" he sneered. You think you can run into the arms of the mob and come out clean? Fear clawed up my spine, but beneath it was anger I hadn't felt in years. My voice didn't tremble as I ordered him out. Not anymore. For too long I had been silent. Tonight I stood straighter. Tonight I told him no. He lunged, grabbing my wrist, twisting until pain sparked white-hot. But before I could cry out, the door burst open. Enzo. His frame filled the doorway. Pale eyes glacial, another man at his side. In an instant, David froze, the bravado draining from his face. "You're trespassing," Enzo said calmly, his voice edged with steel. "And she is under Mr. Russo's protection." Those words, simple and sharp, sliced through the air like a blade. For the first time, David looked afraid, truly afraid. The confrontation ended quickly, but its echo lingered long after he stumbled out into the night, muttering empty threats. Enzo's eyes met mine before he followed, his gaze softer now, as though silently reminding me, "You are not alone anymore." When Vincent arrived minutes later, fury simmered beneath the surface of his calm exterior. His hands scanned my arms, checking for harm, and when I assured him I was unhurt, his jaw clenched tight enough to crack. "This changes things," he said quietly, decisively. "We leave sooner than planned." "Leave." The word struck through me like lightning. My apartment, the small, fragile sanctuary I had built from the ashes of my marriage, was suddenly not a home, but a liability. Everything I had clung to, routine, familiarity, the illusion of safety, was nothing compared to the threat David posed. So I packed. Essentials only. Emma's favorite stuffed rabbit, a stack of important papers, clothes hastily folded into a suitcase. Each item I chose, each item I left behind, was a piece of my past severed in silence. Emma stirred as I dressed her in warm clothes, her sleepy eyes blinking at me. "Are we going on an adventure, Mommy?" she asked, voice small but hopeful. I smoothed her curls, kissed her forehead and whispered, "Yes, baby, the biggest adventure yet." Vincent lifted her into his arms, her head resting against his shoulder as though she had always belonged there. His other hand reached for mine, strong and certain, and in that moment I understood. 3 months ago I had grabbed his hand in desperation. Tonight I was choosing it willingly. We stepped out into the night, leaving behind the shadows of my old life, carrying only what mattered most. And though fear still lingered, there was something stronger now, pulsing in time with the sapphire on my finger and the warmth of his hand. Hope. If you've walked this far with me, if your heart beats a little faster at the thought of finding safety in love's arms, let your presence ripple here. A like, a comment, even a quiet subscription. It is not just support. It is a shared healing, a reminder that love's promise still matters in a world full of shadows. Because this was no longer about survival. It was about choosing a future, no matter how uncertain, with the man whose eyes had taught me to hope again. And as the city lights faded behind us, swallowed by the darkness of open roads and endless possibility, I held tighter to Vincent's hand, knowing the next chapter of our story would test not just our love, but our very survival. The road stretched endlessly into the night, headlights carving a narrow tunnel of light through the darkness. Emma slept curled against my side in the back seat, her small hand tangled in the folds of her stuffed rabbit, while Vincent sat beside me, his arm around my shoulders, steady as stone, warm as fire. Outside, the world blurred past, but inside that car, I felt time slow, stretching into something fragile and suspended. I leaned into him despite myself, exhaustion pulling me closer, and for once, I didn't fight it. His scent was faint but grounding, smoke and cedar, threaded with something darker, something undeniably his. The rhythm of his breathing matched the hum of the tires, and I let it wash over me like healing waves, soothing the ache of everything I was leaving behind. Every so often, his thumb brushed absently over my arm, a silent reminder that he was there, that I wasn't carrying this night alone. He didn't ask if I was all right. He didn't offer false promises. He simply gave me his presence, and it was enough. We drove for hours, the city lights falling away until only shadows of trees lined the road. Somewhere near dawn, we turned down a secluded lane that led to a house hidden among towering pines. Not a mansion like the one in the city, but something quieter, humbler, stone and wood, with warm light glowing from windows as though it had been waiting for us. Enzo pulled the car to a stop, and Vincent guided me out, careful not to wake Emma. He carried her effortlessly, her head tucked against his neck, his hand steady on her back in a way that made my heart ache with a tenderness I hadn't expected from him. Inside, the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and coffee. A fire already crackled in the hearth, chasing away the night's chill. Vincent gestured for me to sit, while he carried Emma into a bedroom, laying her gently on the bed and tucking the blankets around her with surprising care. I watched from the doorway, my chest tightening as he brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, his expression soft in a way I had never seen before. When he returned, his eyes lingered on me. "You're safe here," he said simply, and I believed him. Not because the house had locks or guards, but because of the way he said it, like a vow sealed in his very bones. I sank onto the sofa, the fire's warmth seeping into me. My body trembled with the weight of everything, fear, relief, exhaustion, hope. But Vincent's presence anchored me. He sat beside me, close but not crowding, his gaze steady. "You left everything behind tonight," he said quietly. "That is never easy." A bitter laugh rose before I could stop it. Everything wasn't much. An old sofa, a leaky faucet, memories I'd rather forget. His eyes softened. And yet it was still home. Leaving pieces of ourselves behind is always painful. I turned toward him, caught off guard by the gentleness in his tone. "You sound like you know that from experience." For a moment he said nothing, staring into the fire as if the flames held memories of their own. Then he murmured, "I've left behind entire worlds. Friends, places, even parts of myself I thought I couldn't live without. But sometimes what waits ahead is worth the loss." His words wrapped around me like balm, easing the sting of all I had abandoned. And in that moment, I realized that healing doesn't always come with answers. It sometimes comes in the simple comfort of being understood. Silence settled between us, not heavy, but warm, like a blanket we shared without needing to speak. I closed my eyes, exhaustion pulling at me, and for the first time in years, I let myself drift to sleep beside someone else, trusting that he would keep watch. When morning came, sunlight spilled through the tall windows, painting golden stripes across the wooden floor. Emma's laughter echoed down the hall as she discovered the kitchen, her small feet padding across the tiles. The sound was music, and when I stepped into the room, I found Vincent standing at the counter, a skillet in hand, while Emma perched on a stool, chattering about pancakes shaped like stars. The sight rooted me to the doorway. A man like him, dangerous and powerful, cooking breakfast with my daughter as though he had done it 100 times before. It was surreal, tender, and more beautiful than I could bear. He glanced up, catching me watching, and for a fleeting moment his lips curved into something unguarded, something almost shy. "Good morning." Emma turned, her smile bright. "Mommy, Vincent makes pancakes, not as funny-shaped as yours, but still good." I laughed softly, stepping into the room, letting the warmth of the scene wash over me. For the first time in so long, I felt like I was standing inside a dream instead of chasing one. The day passed in quiet rhythms. Emma exploring the garden outside, Vincent showing me the rooms of the house, each one simple yet touched with care. It wasn't grand wealth that struck me, but the way everything here felt lived in, real. For a while, I almost forgot the world outside, forgot the dangers pressing at the edges, but peace never lingers without reminder. That evening, as the sky turned to twilight, Vincent's phone rang. He stepped outside to take the call, his expression tightening, his voice low and sharp in a language I couldn't understand. When he returned, his jaw was set, but he didn't speak of it. Instead, he touched my hand lightly and said, "Not tonight. Tonight is for rest." I wanted to ask what storm brewed beyond these walls, but his eyes begged me for silence, for trust. So I gave it, for Emma, for myself, for this fragile space we had carved in the chaos. Later, when Emma had fallen asleep and the fire crackled low, Vincent and I sat together on the sofa. His arm rested along the back, his body close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from him. "Why me?" I whispered, before I could stop myself. "Why step into my life? You could have looked away that night. You could have let me hide on my own." His gaze locked onto mine, steady and unwavering. "Because when you grabbed my hand, you didn't see power or fear. You saw a man, and you reminded me that I still was one." The confession unraveled something inside me, loosening a knot I hadn't known I carried. My eyes burned, not with sorrow, but with a release so gentle it felt like healing. For years, I had been unseen, unheard, diminished. And here was a man who carried the weight of an empire, telling me I had given him back his humanity. I reached for his hand then, not in desperation, but in choice. His fingers closed around mine, strong and sure, and in the stillness of that night something unspoken passed between us, a promise not bound by words, but by the simple act of holding on. If your heart has felt the warmth of this chapter, if you've walked through these moments with me and found even a spark of healing in them, let it ripple outward. A comment, a like, even a quiet subscription is more than support. It is a shared breath, a reminder that none of us are truly alone in our stories. For though the night here was gentle, though peace cradled us for a fleeting moment, I knew storms gathered beyond the horizon, and when they came, we would face them together. Morning arrived with the hush that follows a snowfall, though no snow had fallen. The pines outside held the light like prayer candles, and the house breathed slowly around us, as if it too understood that peace is something to hold gently, or it disappears. Emma padded into our room on bare feet, hair haloed in tangles, clutching her rabbit the way I had clutched Vincent's hand in the restaurant, like it was the one true thing. She climbed onto the bed between us with the unquestioning trust of children and kissed my cheek, then Vincent's, as if that had always been her routine. He chuckled, rough with sleep, and I felt the sound through the mattress before I heard it. The edge that lived inside him never vanished entirely, but in the morning light it softened, became almost boyish. He let Emma braid his hair that wasn't long enough for braids, sitting still while she concentrated, her small fingers serious, his large ones patient as the ocean. When she declared him lucky, he nodded as if accepting a formal decree. We kept to quiet rhythms that day, the kind a soul learns to trust after too much turmoil. I made tea, he brewed coffee. Emma discovered a drawer of crayons and a stack of thick paper, spread them like a feast across the kitchen table, and announced she was drawing our house, which she decided included a garden with lights that changed colors. I caught Vincent watching her the way a man watches a horizon, looking for weather, memorizing the shape of a coastline he never wants to lose. His phone stayed face down on the counter for most of the morning. When it finally lit up, he glanced at it once and let it buzz itself into silence. His restraint told me more than any explanation. Whatever the world wanted from him could wait. For us. For this. After lunch, we walked the narrow path behind the house where sun stitched gold through the trees. The wind hummed through the branches, and Emma ran ahead, her laughter jumping from trunk to trunk. I tucked my hand into Vincent's coat pocket with his, a small act that felt as intimate as a confession. He glanced down, then leaned to kiss my temple and let the silence carry what neither of us needed to say. A crow watched us from a high branch. I thought, for one sharp second, that it was a camera. The thought died quickly, but not before it left a thin film of dread on my skin. Healing words drifted up in me like warm breath. Safe, held, keep breathing, and I inhaled until my chest loosened. By late afternoon, clouds thickened at the edge of the sky. Enzo arrived without fanfare, a paper bag of groceries in one arm and a toolbox in the other. He repaired the back door's sticking latch, then replaced the bulbs in the porch lights and adjusted something in the fuse box I wouldn't have thought to check. The world had taught me the difference between presence and intrusion. Enzo understood it too. He moved like someone who made space safer simply by being in it. "Storm tonight," he said, eyes on the tree line, not on us. "I'll set the generator to automatic." "Thank you," I said, and meant it more deeply than my voice could hold. He nodded, almost embarrassed by gratitude, then crouched to accept a crayon drawing Emma solemnly presented. 3 stick figures holding hands under a sky full of stars. "This one is you," she said, tapping the tallest figure, then pointed to the smallest. "And this is me, and this is Mommy." She paused and added a 4th small circle to the largest figure's chest. "And this is his heart, so he doesn't forget it." Enzo's eyes flicked to mine, startled, and he smiled the smallest smile I'd ever seen on him. After dinner, the rain began. It came in threads at first, humming against the windows like fingertips, then gathered itself into a steady drumbeat that made the forest smell deeper, richer. The 3 of us sat by the fire, Emma in Vincent's lap, studying a book of Italian fairy tales Maria had sent. He translated as he read, not showing off, but weaving the music of his mother tongue into English so that the story felt like a lullaby stitched from two worlds. When Emma fell asleep, I carried her to bed. I watched her breathe for a long moment, felt the heat of her small body in the room, left the door cracked so the hall's nightlight painted a soft crescent on the floor. When I returned to the living room, the house had changed in the way rooms do when a child leaves them, the noise gone, the tenderness settled like a shawl. Vincent was at the window, one hand braced on the frame, profile carved in shadow and firelight. He didn't turn as I approached. I rested my palm between his shoulder blades and felt the tension there coil like a waiting question. "It's not nothing," I said softly. His exhale fogged the glass. "No." He let the word sit, then added, "A car was seen near the outer road last night. Could be nothing. Could be curiosity. Could be suggestion." "From your world," I said. His mouth tilted, a ghost of a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "From the part of it I'm leaving. What do? "We live," he said simply, "and we keep the lights on. Enzo is nearby. I trust him with my life, with yours." He finally turned, and the look in his eyes undid me. Not fear, not bravado, but a fierce, steady determination wrapped around a deliberately gentle center. "If anything touches you or Emma, Lily, it goes through me first." I nodded, not because I needed him to be the wall, but because I recognized that he had chosen to be. It's a particular kind of love to stand between the danger and the one you love, a vow made of muscle and bone. It is another kind to stand beside them and say, "I will not leave." I felt both inside my chest at once, tender and unshakable. We slept little. The rain thickened, wind prowled the house's edges, and sometime around 3 the power flickered. The generator kicked in with a low shudder. Vincent was up, moving through the rooms with a flashlight, checking doors with the quiet competence of someone who knows how quickly safety can change its mind. I followed, because I wanted to see the world with the same eyes as the man who had promised us shelter. Our breaths sent small white ghosts into the cool hallway air. We laughed at that, because even in storms there are reasons to laugh. In the blue hour before dawn, a noise woke me. The soft complaint of gravel outside the kitchen door, a sound that didn't belong to the rain. Vincent was already on his feet. He held a hand out behind him without looking, palm open, a command and a comfort. I slid my fingers into his and felt how calm he was. People think courage is a surge. Sometimes it is a quiet river that doesn't flood. He crossed the kitchen with the ease of someone who has memorized the space. From the drawer he took a heavy flashlight, from the cabinet a narrow, ugly thing that made my heart lurch. He caught my eyes. "Stay behind me," he mouthed. I nodded. We waited. The rain filled the silence, but beneath it another sound. Then a knock. Not frantic, not hesitant. 3 measured clicks on wood. Vincent's shoulders loosened a fraction. He slid the bolt and opened the door 2 inches. "Not polite, Enzo," he murmured. "Not safe, boss," Enzo murmured back. "But necessary." He stepped inside, rainwater gleaming on his coat, eyes already taking inventory of the room. He glanced down the hall toward Emma's door and nodded. "All quiet," he said, answering the question I hadn't voiced. He set a phone on the counter. New, he said to me. Only 3 numbers in it. Mine, Mr. Russo's, Maria's. Keep the old one off tonight. He said it gently, as if suggesting a sweater. What happened? Vincent asked. Enzo's jaw worked, the muscle there speaking a language all its own. 2 cars on the far road, parked just long enough to see what they could see. Left when I turned the floodlight. No plates. Either they're bad at this or they wanted to be noticed. Message received, Vincent said, voice like cooled iron. I thought of the crow, then, of how fear dresses itself in feathers and shadows, begging to be fed. I chose not to feed it. I pictured Emma's drawing, the heart on the chest so the person wouldn't forget it, and I held that, instead, warm as a cup between my hands. By noon, the storm passed. The sky cracked open into a thin, fragile blue. Vincent insisted we drive to the small town beyond the next ridge. Air, sunlight, the simple act of buying milk and cinnamon and batteries as a kind of spell against the night we had just lived. Enzo went ahead in his own car, then didn't come into the market with us. His presence moved like weather, felt but not seen. We were halfway down the baking aisle when I felt it. A prickle, the sense of being watched that isn't paranoia but memory in the bones. Vincent felt it too. I saw the shift in him, a sharpening that kept his face gentle while everything inside reorganized around vigilance. He didn't touch me, but my skin buzzed as if he had. At the end of the aisle, a man turned into view. He was ordinary in the way a decoy is ordinary. Faded baseball cap, jacket too thin for the recent storm, hands bare and empty. He paused at the spices with forced care, eyes sliding past us, then back, then away, like a moth pretending not to notice the porch light. In the reflection on the freezer door, I saw his angle change. I felt the old fear trying to find its way back into my throat. "Stay with the cart," Vincent said mildly, as if discussing cinnamon. He took 2 slow steps forward, then another 2, the way a tide moves around a rock, inevitable and calm. The man looked up. Their eyes met, a soundless conversation in a language of rank and decision. The man flicked his gaze over my shoulder, to the aisles behind us, to the front door, to the mirror above the produce section, counting exits, doing the math. Vincent didn't glance away from him once. He set the cinnamon in our basket, then reached for my hand and kissed my fingers, casual, affectionate, an ordinary lover, in an ordinary store. The man blinked, as if he'd been expecting the wolf, and instead found a husband. He made his choice. He left without buying anything. The breath I'd been holding escaped in a stutter. Vincent's thumb stroked the soft inside of my wrist. "We go," he said, still gentle. Outside, the sun made puddles into small mirrors. Enzo leaned against his car, appearing to watch the clouds. "He won't come back," he said when we reached him. He was there to confirm, not to try. "To confirm what?" I asked, though I knew. "That you're real," Vincent said. "That this life I want is not a story I made up for myself." He didn't add what hung between us, that a man like him leaving creates vacuums. Vacuums attract questions. Questions send scouts. That sometimes the most dangerous battle happens after the last bullet is fired, inside the minds of men deciding what your future is allowed to be. We went home. We made cinnamon toast for Emma, who declared it perfect because the sugar stuck to her lips like fairy dust. We built a fort over the living room rug and crawled into it, all elbows and giggles, Enzo pretending to trip over the blanket and sending Emma into a joy so fierce it turned the whole house young. I tucked these moments away, the way sailors used to tuck letters in their breast pockets, close enough to keep warm in a storm. After dinner, Vincent carried a box from the closet in the master bedroom. He set it on the bed and opened it as if it were something sacred. Inside lay stacks of photographs, edges curled, colors softened by time. He sat cross-legged, and I joined him. We let our shoulders touch like a form of prayer. "That's my mother," he said, and placed a photo in my hand. A woman with a laugh you could hear through the paper, hair blown back by wind, eyes daring the camera to look away first. She was very small, he added, fondness turning the words into warmth, and afraid of nothing. He passed me his father next, formal pose, softer eyes. He worked with his hands, Vincent said. He built things that did not apologize for taking up space. "And you?" I asked, turning to him. "What did you build?" "Walls," he said. No self-pity, just truth. He picked up another photo, himself as a boy on a beach, a kite, a red slash against the sky. And now, I am trying to build doors. I pressed my fingers to the image, the tiny boy in 2 big shorts and an expression already solemn enough to break a mother's heart. "You already are," I said. We didn't speak for a long time. The house breathed. The rain had washed the world clean and left it smelling new. When he set the photos aside, I laced our hands together over the empty box and rested my forehead against his. "You're not losing yourself," I whispered. "You're finding the part that was buried." His breath hitched, barely. "Stay." "I am." He kissed me then, not like a vow this time, not like a benediction, like a man who had spent years rationing touch and had finally discovered abundance. It was unhurried and fierce, patient and certain, the taste of cinnamon still on his tongue. When we parted, the lamp cast light across his face in a way that made him look both older and impossibly young. Later, I checked on Emma and stood in her doorway for a long time. The nightlight made moons of her cheeks. Her rabbit lay on its back beside her, arms thrown wide as if surrendering to joy. My eyes burned the way they do when a prayer finds you without asking permission. Safe, held, keep breathing. I repeated it until my chest felt quiet. Sometime near midnight, the crows started again, far off this time, calling to one another across the dark. I could have sworn they were saying, "Here, here," not as a warning, as a locating. I woke before dawn to the soft clink of a spoon in a mug. Vincent stood at the counter with 2 cups, steam lifting like thin silk. He handed me one without a word. We drank, elbows touching, watching the window tint from ink to pearl. The day arrived. He set his cup down and faced me fully. "We should go back to the city for a day," he said. "Not to the house. To somewhere neutral. I need to sign papers to make it real. After that, we leave for a while, not forever, long enough to let the dust fall. And Emma, with us," he said immediately, as if the idea of any other configuration offended him. "Always with us." I thought of sunlight on vineyards, of tiny balconies with laundry lines and basil in windows, of a life where danger existed, but not in the room with us, not as a fourth presence at the table. I nodded. Then we go. We spent the morning packing, not with the frantic, lurching speed of our last departure, but with the calm of people choosing a road because it leads somewhere they want to be. Enzo brought a second SUV. He shared the route, a detour, a signal pattern for the lights if anything felt wrong. He handed me the new phone again, like a ritual. His fingers brushed mine, a soldier's blessing. At the door, I paused. The house smelled of last night's fire and cinnamon and rain. On the back of the couch, a blanket still sagged from the fort, an accidental flag of a country we had invented. I left it there on purpose, a promise to return. We buckled Emma into the back seat. She swung her legs, humming to herself, then leaned forward between our seats and whispered conspiratorially, "Are we going to the place where the flowers talk?" Vincent smiled. "Someday soon," he said. "Today we're going to a place where papers talk." "Do papers tell stories?" she asked. "They do," I said, and took his hand as Enzo opened the gate. "They tell futures." The tires whispered on the wet road. The forest watched us go. And as the highway unspooled in a long silver ribbon toward the life waiting on the other side of signatures and sharpened decisions, I felt something settle deep inside me. Not courage exactly, not relief, but a steady, humming yes. The kind that fills a body from the inside out and glows under the skin like a dawn you can carry. We drove into it together. And ahead, just beyond the next rise, a city lifted its glass and stone like a complicated blessing, ready to test what we had built and name what we were becoming. The city shimmered beneath a veil of late afternoon haze, towers etched against a sky the color of burnished copper. From the back seat, Emma pressed her small palms to the window, gasping at every glint of glass, every rushing train, every flash of light. To her, this was an adventure, the world unfolding like a storybook page. To me, it felt like stepping into the eye of a storm I could neither predict nor avoid. Yet Vincent's hand was steady on mine, his grip an anchor. We did not drive to the mansion where whispers clung like ivy, nor to any restaurant where his name silenced the air. Instead, Enzo led us to a quiet building in the historic district, its stone facade softened by ivy and time. Inside, the scent of leather and ink lingered, a room full of shelves and law books, and an older man behind a heavy desk who greeted Vincent with a familiarity tinged with deference. Papers waited there, contracts, deeds, signatures that would cut ties with a life too long lived in shadows. Vincent sat, pen poised, eyes dark with resolve. Emma perched on my lap, scribbling shapes on a scrap of paper Maria had tucked into her backpack. And I, watching the ink flow across page after page, realized I was witnessing more than business. I was witnessing a man carve a new path with his own hand, a man willing to leave power behind because hope had taken its place. When it was finished, the lawyer nodded solemnly. "It is done," he said. Simple words, yet they vibrated through the air like a bell tolling a new beginning. Outside, dusk had settled, washing the streets in violet shadows. We walked hand in hand down cobbled sidewalks, Emma skipping between us, her laughter catching the light of street lamps as they flickered on. For a few precious blocks, we looked like nothing more than a family out for an evening stroll. No ghosts, no watchers, no danger threading itself through our steps. Just us. But peace is always fragile in a city built on secrets. We stopped at a small cafe, warm and golden inside, where the scent of baked bread and coffee curled around us. Emma devoured a pastry dusted in sugar, her lips sparkling with it, while Vincent ordered wine for himself and tea for me. He looked almost ordinary in that light, his suit jacket draped across the back of his chair, his expression soft as he listened to Emma describe her drawing. Yet every so often his gaze flicked toward the window, sharp, measuring. I followed his glance once, catching the faintest glimpse of a figure across the street. A man leaning against a lamppost, cigarette glowing, his eyes on nothing and everything. A watcher. Fear pricked my skin, but Vincent's voice drew me back. "Lily," he said gently, his hand covering mine on the table. "Look at me." And when I did, the fear ebbed. His presence was healing in its own way, solid, certain, reminding me that shadows lose their teeth when you stop feeding them with panic. Night deepened. Enzo returned with the car, and we drove not to our apartment, not to his mansion, but to a safe house nestled by the river. Smaller, humbler. Its windows glowed with quiet welcome. It smelled faintly of cedar and rain, of a place waiting to be lived in. We put Emma to bed in a room where fireflies flickered against the glass outside, and for the first time in days her sleep was unbroken by murmurs or restless turns. I stood watching her chest rise and fall, a prayer forming in my throat without words. Safe, held, keep breathing. In the living room, Vincent waited by the window. The lamplight painted gold across his jaw, his features carved by shadows. When I joined him, he didn't speak at first. He simply reached into his pocket and drew out a small box, velvet soft and familiar. My breath caught. "I told you once this was not an engagement," he murmured, eyes steady on mine. "It was a promise, but promises, when honored, have a way of becoming vows." He opened the box. The sapphire glowed again, but beside it now lay a second band, simple, gleaming silver. Not ostentatious, not heavy, just pure, unbroken. "I am not asking you for forever tonight," he said. "I am asking for now. For each day we choose again. For Emma. For us. For a life where light outweighs shadow." Tears blurred my vision. My fingers trembled as he slid the band beside the sapphire. The two stones catching the light like stars, learning how to shine together. His lips brushed mine then, warm, sure, unhurried, and I let myself fall into the truth I had feared to believe. That love, even here, even now, could be healing. Later, when we lay together on the sofa, firelight dancing across the walls, I asked softly, "Do you ever regret it? The world you're leaving?" He traced a line down my arm, slow and thoughtful. "Regret is for men who believe they lost something worth keeping. I have not lost. I have found." His hand stilled over my heart. "I have found you." The words sank deep, planting roots in soil I thought barren. And for the first time in so long, I did not feel like a woman running from shadows. I felt like a woman walking toward light. If this story has touched your heart, if you felt even a spark of warmth or healing within these pages, I invite you to let it ripple outward. Leave your thoughts in a comment, share a like, or subscribe to stay with me as this journey continues. Your presence here is more than support. It is a shared flame in the dark, a reminder that love, no matter how fragile, can still bloom even in the unlikeliest of places. And as the night pressed deeper, Vincent's hand entwined with mine, Emma safe in the next room, I knew this was not the end, but the beginning. The storm had not vanished, but within it we had found our shelter. And together we would carry this light forward into whatever dawn awaited us.